people are doing okay. They treat each other with a certain amount of civility and decency. They may play with the ideas of civil war and chaos.
Yeah.
They may play with it online, but they do not want that for their kids. They do not want that for their family members. They don't want that for grandma. They don't want that in their places of work. So the question is, how do you deal with this weird thing where people are you know what I'm getting at? I mean, it's like there's a split screen in the American public where their actual day-to-day lives are one thing. And yet when they turn to politics, they have different moral standards, they have different ethical standards, and they have different appetites. And it's just like, okay, it's like, do you understand that this is one world? And are you really going to vote for something that you may like toying with when you're following Charlie Kirk's Twitter feed, but you don't want in your hometown?
And you see this split scene on the economy. You ask people, how are things doing? Oh, terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. Well, what are you doing in your personal life? Well, I'm starting a new business. American business startups are at record highs. Oh, okay. What are you doing tonight? Oh, I'm taking the kids out for dinner. That seems expensive. Oh, yeah, I can afford it. This is like the worst economy since the Great Depression, and dining out is reaching new highs. Business startups are reaching new highs. You're not acting. Mm-hmm. What you're saying and what you're doing, and you, Mr. Mrs. around the corner, what you yourself are doing by starting that new business is declaring your faith in the future of America.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's smart. Like the surest way of getting poor in this world is betting against the United States of America.
But this may trigger some memories. This is not the first time in the world, first time in American political history where things have been relatively okay, and yet, in the political world, it was the worst economy in 50 years. I'm kind of flashing back to 1992. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Where Bill Clinton was running. This was the worst economy in 50 years, at the very time when it was very clear we were coming out of the recession, things were getting better. And yet George H.W. Bush was just not able ever to convince people that things were getting better. The public just looked at him and they thought, no, things are not getting any better. We want something different. And that was, I just remember the frustration of Republicans back then. You were in that world.
As I look back on 92, I have a different theory about what happened that election, and I think it does apply to today, and it may be in a more helpful way. So, from Nixon to Reagan, American politics is dominated by a conservative coalition,
right?
That is bound together by dislike of inflation, dislike of disorder, dislike of too fast a pace of social change, and resolution in the face of foreign enemies, especially the communist ones. And that's the Nixon, the Cold War coalition. It's about crime, it's about inflation, it's about the Soviet Union, and it holds together from about 1966, when the Republicans have that big win in those off-year elections, to 1990 and the end of the Cold War. Yes, there's a downturn, the mildest since World War II. But there's also the end of the Cold War, and the coalition begins to unravel. And both in micro ways. And one of the things that happens with the end of the Cold War is there are a lot of layoffs in the engineering industry in Southern California. A lot of people who had steady jobs in the defense industry. The peace dividend is no dividend if you are an engineer at Lockheed Martin or whatever the company was called in those days. And so the Bush the Nixon to Reagan coalition cracks up, and Bush keeps some of it, but some of it is put into play, and Ross Perot claims a piece of it, and Bill Clinton with 42% of the vote, which is less than Michael Dukakis got 4 years before, but is able to become president. Well, I think we may be at a moment like that where we've had a lot of the coalitions we're used to are rearranging, and I think for many of the people who make this particular podcast, and some of those who listen to it, I mean, what are the anchor of our political identity is belief in the mission of the United States in the world, confidence that we live in a better world because of the strength and credibility of the United States. And we look at issues like Ukraine and Israel, the defense of the Philippines against the Chinese, and we say, that whoever is doing that, that's where we belong.
Mhm.
And we, of course, we also want a market-oriented economy at home, but we'll make some compromises on some of those things to get the thing that is our first commitment, which is a belief in the goodness and greatness in the United States and America's role in the world. And so, just as the Nixon-Reagan coalition came unstuck, there may be in 1990 and 92, there may be a new coalition coming together, and it doesn't have a figurehead because I don't think there was ever a time in his life when Biden could have articulated this. And if there ever was, it probably isn't now. So a lot of the messiness is because there's no great voice speaking for what could be. But again, there is a thing that could be, and maybe it's happening.